On this episode of AV Week, CES goes virtual for the very first time. What were the big takeaways from the show? How do you create an interactive experience online? And figuring out 4K for end users. All that and more. Next on AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 491, recorded Friday, January 15th, 2021. Corona Tech.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Atlas IED, innovative audio solutions for every business environment, and by FSR.
This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of audio-visual news and information. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information we have gathered for this second week now of January. First and foremost, Dawn Mead. You know her as AV Dawn. We can't tell you where she works because then we'd have to do things to you. How are you, ma'am?
That sounds wrong, but very good, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Also with us, a young man that I actually just met in person about a year or so ago through our friend, mutual friend, Mr. Cristoto. But his name is Paul Richards. He's with PTZ Optics, but also has a fantastic channel called Stream Geeks. Welcome, sir.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And last but not least, a very, I'm not going to call her an old friend because I'm older than she is, but I've known her a long time, Rachel Bradshaw, who just recently joined one of my favorite PR firms, Castor Communications. So how are you, madam?
I'm fabulous. Good to see you, Tim.
Good to see you. Good to see you. So we're actually I'll start with Dawn on this. But speaking of Castor and Rachel, they just finished up a virtual trade show. One of the things that Kim Lancaster and the team there does is they cover and they support technology companies. CES is typically one of their busiest times of the year. However, now they're not in Vegas this year. They are virtual. So this was the first and biggest show of the year to go virtual, Dawn. They announced it back in August. And so as they're doing that, they're obviously ramping up and getting all of the parts and pieces from a virtual standpoint. As you're watching this week, what were your takeaways from this virtual CES? What were some things that they did well, some things they didn't do so well, or what were some of the highlights from a product standpoint?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I haven't been able to sit in on a lot of sessions. This week was a week where I actually had to go back into the office for a couple of days, which these days is, scary. But I think that they're doing a good job of getting the information out there. And I mean, the problem with CES, even over and above like, your infocoms and things, is it's just massive. It's just so many, infocom and some shows like that. It's like, this is AV. We have the sound people, we have the signage people, we have the, guts in the middle people. That's it. When you're talking CES, you've got phone guys and car guys. I saw something that they GM showed a flying car at CES. You had everything from tech that we're caring about, DisplayPort 2.0, for instance. There were announcements on that, things that impact us as an AV community, clear up to fancy, expensive, but reusable, rechargeable face masks for the post-COVID world. So it's just so massive that, even just flipping through to see the highlights, it could take days. So, but I do like the fact that a lot of the virtual trade shows, they're making the shows more accessible to people that normally would not be able to fly to Vegas, normally would not be able to take the days off and go and attend, see the announcements first up, or, at most we'd get to see a press release, whereas now they're doing a little more with like videos and virtual press. Things like that, it's big positive. I hope that Infocom and CES and ISE and all of the shows do keep a virtual component going forward for just that reason, so that more folks can attend virtually if they can't make it in person. But I also, this year and last year, I said this on a different show, I feel really bad for all those sweet little old ladies in Vegas that usually scan our badges at classes, because, they're not going to have their bingo money and their little fun money if, working their jobs at the convention center with the badge scanners. So, It's really a kind of a mixed bag, but I'm excited that the virtual show concept is taking off.
I hate to tell you this, but that's not bingo money. I'm just going to point that out
Well,
there.
yeah, in some
It's
cases,
Vegas.
yeah, it's their outright living money, but
Yeah. I was going the other way with it's more gambling money, but okay.
well,
All right.
you know,
Bingo is gambling, Tim. To
either
be clear.
way, yeah.
Okay. Yes, technically, but don't. All right. Rachel Bradshaw, pipe type. So both from a PR standpoint, but also as somebody who used to help a trade show, i.e. Infocom, what were your takeaways from this virtual? And Dawn's right. It is the biggest, I could be wrong here, but don't think I am, the biggest trade show in North America from a calendar standpoint. So it going virtual, what were your takeaways?
I kind of want to bounce the ball over to Paul on this one because he is really expert at creating engaging virtual experiences. But I think it's really telling what Dawn said about how she hasn't been like totally immersed in CES this year. What a weird year, right? Normally for Caster as an organization, we would have been in Las Vegas for a week already. You know, we would have said goodbye to all of our families on New Year's Eve, and we would have had a hellish holiday preparing for CES because it's just the busiest time of the year for us. And this year it was strangely quiet leading up to CES. And it's been my experience that, you know, people are paying attention to the news coming out of CES, but they are just not immersed in it in the way that, you know, you would be obviously if you were physically there. But even if you're not physically there, the way that people typically pay just rapt attention to everything that's happening in Las Vegas in early January. And I think that's down a bit to the approach that CES has taken to virtual events, which is not the only approach that exists to virtual events. I do think more broadly, and I hope that like any of my friends who are hearing this podcast won't be offended that I steal their smart ideas, but I've been talking to a lot of smart people about virtual CES this week. And I do think that there is a lot of interesting wellness technology happening at CES this year. Giles Sutton, who is the co-interim CEO of Cedia, said to me earlier this week, you know, it's all Corona tech. And that applies not just to the stuff that's explicitly health technology or wellness technology, but all of the technologies that are being informed by this newfound awareness of how important it is to exert control over your environment with respect to health and wellness. So all of the, you know, touchless digital signage technologies that we're seeing right now is in essence Corona tech. All of the technologies that we see that focus on being able to control things at a distance or with fewer people is in a sense Corona tech. The smart doorbells that we're seeing that allow you to check somebody's temperature before they enter your home. It's all informed by the way that the past year has changed the culture to make us probably permanently more aware of the ways that we put ourselves at risk by moving around in the world and how technology can help us mitigate those risks.
Absolutely. Well, Paul, Rachel mentioned you and bouncing it over to you because she's right. You created probably one of the more immersive events that we had last year. I'm not saying that just because I was involved with it, because it really was. And not for nothing, but the college radio part of me was in love with G Love 25 years ago and got to see him live-ish, you know, so that was also awesome. But talk about it from two standpoints. Also, from the standpoint of somebody who has literally written the book on creating virtual events, but also somebody who's produced a number of them. Look at it from that standpoint, but also from a manufacturing standpoint, right? You know, as a manufacturer who would typically go to a trade show, maybe not CES, maybe sometimes. What was your takeaways from this one?
Well, you know, to Dawn's, one of the things that Dawn said that struck me is that it probably was the best year to attend CES without actually being there. You know, the creators of CES definitely put some time into the production value. Who are the hosts going to be? How are we going to make this as interactive as possible? They also are dealing with almost an impossible paradox of how do you create an intimate experience with millions of people? It's impossible, right? They weren't using Zoom breakout rooms. There's just too many people to do that with. From a manufacturer's perspective, we did attend CES in 2020 or maybe it was 2019, but it was a great show, because there's a lot of new techie people that you can get exposed to that don't even know what Infocom is, to be honest, yet they're influencers on YouTube. They are, well-known tech people who are tech writers for The Verge, for example. Yep. So the audience at CES is great. But from a manufacturer's standpoint, if you're not Microsoft, it's very easy to get lost into the mix. And if you're not on the official agenda, the exhibitor list is just too long. And what they were doing from a virtual event, everybody watches that main broadcast, but the trickle-down effect for the small to medium-sized manufacturers, we haven't seen a great return on investment with virtual events unless it's a small event. If it's a small event, small group, you can get into those intimate breakout rooms. And we're talking about streaming technology. We're talking about video communications technology. It's very relevant. But CES did their best. And you mentioned we had G-Love at our Small Presence Summit conference. I would have loved to have Keith Urban and the lineup that they had at CES. That certainly would draw some crowds. So it was a good year. If you like virtual events, this was the year to attend virtually. But there was no in-person experience. And, you love turning that corner and seeing the new, pub style pong table that you can put in your basement. And you love bumping into celebrities. That happens. These YouTube celebrities are running around with your cameras. Who's that guy? Oh, he's got 5 million followers. Oh, well, I just bumped into him and we chatted. That doesn't happen virtually, sadly.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with you. But really quickly, just as a clarification here, because different people's ideas is have different numbers. You said a small intimate event. Granted, CES again is the biggest ginormous event, at least in the U.S. I don't think that I would qualify the President Summit as small though. What for your standpoint? What would you consider a small, I guess, manageable from the standpoint of getting intimate event, like from a number standpoint?
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'll reference a couple pieces of technology and things that I've looked at to understand that. One is, Zoom limits their Zoom meetings to 300 people usually in like the basic pro license, and that's been studied. In fact, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about it. I think it was his book called Blink, but I can't remember. It was a tipping point where they studied organizations beyond 300. You just can't remember everybody's name anymore. Yeah. You just can't make those connections, let alone try to do that in one virtual event. We're talking about organizations who are building their companies with units of 300 people because they're trying to learn all those 300 people by face, by name. They work together all year round, and that's how they do it, let alone a virtual event. On Twitch, going the virtual route, the live streaming route, a lot of influencers that I talk about and live streamers, this is a really funny statistic, but it comes up over and over again. Once you get over like 100 or 200 live viewers, it's too many people to recognize who's who, and they hire chat room moderators to try to figure it out for them. But it's interesting study that once you go past like 300, 400 people, the intimacy of the viewer to the content creator who's talking to the chat room, they actually start making less money on Twitch. So for the people who make their living on Twitch, and there's Twitch donations and bits and things of that nature, the ones who can cultivate a super intimate 100, 200, 300 person live stream experience actually end up making more per person through the donation system than those who are getting thousands and can't create those intimate experiences. So, at the President Summit, I think we had like 200 or 300 people watching live, and then we would have like 50 or 60 in these breakout rooms. And, you get to know those people. And, at the CES level, that's why I mentioned it as a paradox, because they're trying to accommodate so much, but they were kind of unable to divide it up evenly and allow people to create. Now, they did have Microsoft and Microsoft Teams, and they were creating rooms for people to go in to talk to vendors. And, from my experience, that is good. And people do come in, and you don't get 1,000 people at once. You get a couple people coming in and out. So that's my thoughts on it. Trying to go above 300 in a single space is, gets to be too much.
It makes a whole lot of sense. Go ahead.
Yeah. Tim, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree 100% with what Paul said. And we've seen this in our own industry before. We always come and do our post-InfoComm shows. And InfoComm is not near the scope and scale of CES, just in sheer volume of both vendors and people. But we talk about, you go to the show to like have your private meetings and FaceTime with some people, but also just to like run around the booths and look at things. You'll get that intimate like demo explanation at a smaller regional show, or when your rep comes into your company. We don't rely on the big show to give us the information we need for purchasing more than we rely on that smaller, intimate. And, it also speaks to why sci-fi conventions and magazine or Comic-Cons, you get those autograph lines. Since the pandemic, there's this thing now called Cameo. And Cameo, you can just reach out to your favorite celeb, and for probably the cost of a picture at Comic-Con, you get a one-on-one video from them or special greeting from them or something. So there's a lot to be said for that, keeping things intimate and just the psychology of humans, I think. So
yeah. And to pile on, as a recovering event organizer, I think that something that Paul does really, really effectively is create layers of intimacy at his events. Like if you go to any Stream Geeks event or the upcoming House of Worship Summit or the Presence Summit, you'll find that there are activities that are designed to be mass activities. There are activities that are designed to be group activities, and there are activities that are designed to be intimate activities. And it's the same thing at a physical trade show. You have the floor, which is this mass activity. You have group activities with your conferences and your breakouts, and you have more intimate activities with dinners and one-on-one meetings. And you need all of those layers of interaction to create a really compelling event. It seems to happen pretty organically at a physical trade show because, like Paul was saying, you have that kismet, right? Like you meet people, you connect with them, you decide to go to dinner together, intimacy happens, boom, nobody even has to plan it necessarily, although we do obsessively. But with a virtual event, you have a twofold problem. You have to create those layers of intimacy, which is really, really hard. And then you have to convince people to participate in them, which can feel really, really unnatural. It's not easy.
No, it's not. It goes down to the incentives that you give people, whether that's physical, whether that's the swag or the tchotchkes, or is those connections, right? And I'll point back real quickly before we get on to the next story. I met Frank Paticala, who's now taken over one of our RT AV show, through one of those, those connections, right? It was a breakout room, actually at InfoComm, the happy hour we did, right? And he and I ended up together in the room together. I'd never met him in person, obviously. I had known him social media, but had never met him. We had a connection, right? And so that's an incentive, is making those connections. So absolutely. Thanks so much for watching this first segment of AV Week. To check out the rest of the episode for free, click on the link below or go by the website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv.